Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar entitled The Year Ahead. My name is Leor Rotchild. I'm the Executive Director of Canadian Business for Social Responsibility, or CBSR. And I'm joining you today from Mohkinstsis. It's the Blackfoot name for the place we commonly know as Calgary, which is located in the Treaty 7 region and traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Nakoda, and the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. As we reflect on the land and the privileges that we've inherited through the stewardship of others, let's recommit ourselves to following through on the 94 calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report. Especially relevant for this crowd is call to action number 92, which calls on the corporate sector in Canada to adopt the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples as a reconciliation framework and to apply its principles, norms, and standards to corporate policy and core operational activities involving Indigenous peoples and their lands and resources. We're extremely happy to have you, and we have some amazing guest speakers who are helping us to kick off the year ahead. And just so you know, the year ahead is really our opportunity, and all of us, our opportunity to reflect on the year ahead. And it's an opportunity to explore the issues that we believe will define the next 11 months. There's a lot of uncertainty out there, isn't there? After fumbling our way out of a global pandemic, we find ourselves in the midst of a tragic war in Eastern Europe, reshaping geopolitics, adding significant pressure on already stretched global supply chains and inflation. And ESG has hit the mainstream, but it's also facing a counter movement. CBSR's net zero leaderboard has tracked 130 Canadian companies that have made a net zero commitment, but it doesn't yet feel like it's hit a critical mass. And scope 3 is still an elusive mystery for many. Meanwhile, climate-related weather events around the world are wreaking havoc and having a disproportional effect on those already marginalized in our society. We've invited a global expert and two national leaders that we truly admire to help us see past the fog and focus on the momentum gathering around specific issues shaping our world today and our economy going forward. I'm proud to introduce them to you and invite them to share their thoughts with us today. I'll introduce Andrea and Geoff in a bit more detail as I invite them to speak. But just so you know that we have Andrea Harris from Vancity here, Geoff Pegg from TELUS, and we also have the person that I'm going to invite to open this webinar, this dialogue. His name is Dominic Waughray. And Dominic is a really interesting person. He's the Executive Vice President and member of the leadership team at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development based in Geneva, Switzerland. Dominic joined WBCSD in October 2021 as Senior Advisor to the President and CEO, where he led business efforts to accelerate the WBCSD imperatives tackling climate change, nature loss, and inequality. Dominic is formally with the World Economic Forum, which is meeting in Davos right now. And so we're really happy to have Dominic with us rather than being in Davos to help us unpack some of what he sees happening in the world and the issues that are going to shape 2023 going forward. Dominic, may I invite you to speak to our audience, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much, Leon. It's a delight to be here, and welcome to all of you who are listening, whether across Canada or elsewhere. You're so right about 2023. You know, the barometer varies between a global recession or optimism, between conflict over woke is a bad thing or ESG is a bad thing or ESG is a good thing, or we should get back to basics. What we do know, as you rightly say, Leor, is physics doesn't really care about that. There is incontrovertible evidence that unequivocally the climate is warming. And any IPCC data that you take a look at will show you that. Any group of scientists will tell you that. 2022 was the third warmest year in the last decade with the data that's just been coming in, and you'll have experienced changing patterns in climate and floods, droughts and such, as have many people around the world. Now, over the last 2 or 3 years, and particularly since the Paris Agreement of 2015, we've also seen a rise, as you rightly say, Leor, in business desire to show what they can do in terms of environmental, social governance action, ESG action, and in particular in commitments to reducing emissions, joining coalitions and sector initiatives on climate change. Glasgow COP, the Conference of the Parties in Glasgow at the end of 2021, was almost a zenith of corporate action with the Race to Zero campaign led by the UN champions. 2 years on, and any of you who are in Sharm el-Sheikh COP or who've been following it will know, quite importantly, that now we're in an era of accountability. That for many out there and for many in the investor and policy community, how do we know that companies are doing what they said they would do? How do we know that we're really taking a bite out of the climate challenge with corporate action? And for companies who are leading this, is there a kind of a credible and robust framework that they can follow to show that they are doing the right thing, both to their investors, to their shareholders as well, and to others in society? I do have a couple of slides which can help to illustrate this. I've only got 3, so it won't be a long lecture, but they're quite informative and based on lots of corporate feedback. So if we could move to the slides, and I'll show you the first one. It'll illustrate to you part of the challenge that many companies face. If we move to the first image, please. Because what many companies face, if we go to the next slide, please, is a very, very complicated journey. So if you keep clicking through the slides as I talk, you'll see that if you're a CSO or if you're working to the board, you have to kind of figure out the baseline of your GHG emissions, and there's all kind of questions about that and standards to follow. Then there's challenges around the credibility of the targets that you have to set. What rules do I need? How do I validate them? And then in terms of creating transition plans, where do I find information about my cost curves? Where is the data for scope 3? Where do I kind of find evidence about what I need to change in terms of my business model? And if we keep going with another click, how do I disclose accountably? Which of these standards or frameworks should I use? Another click, and you'll see that there's even more questions for the CSO or whoever's responsible for designing this net zero corporate user journey. And another click, you'll see that it's just difficult to progress. We have the International Sustainability Standards Board that is coming up with guidance, but this slide is based on many WBCSD global companies and their people who are responsible to their boards to try and set out their journey on getting to net zero. Really difficult with these steps, setting a baseline, setting credible targets, creating a transition plan, and accounting for it, and disclosing accountably, and proving that progress has been made. So a couple more clicks through this slide, and the challenges grow. And if we go to the next slide, please, you'll see that as we build up the ecosystem that the company has to work through, there's an awful lot of logos. So you'll recall that for a company, it has to start with the accounting, like how do I know what to measure? And do I use the de facto baseline, which is the Greenhouse Gas Protocol that the World Business Council for Sustainable Development has co-led? with WRI for over 22 years. ISO are coming up with some standards drawing very much on the GHGP. There are other particular industry standards. You mentioned in your introduction, and it's absolutely right, that there's a lot of head scratching going on around scope 3. So is that product level emissions data? That's what the Partnership for Carbon Transparency is working on, and feeding that into the GHGP. But there's lots of different carbon accounting arenas. Once I've got that and I go to disclose that information, what rules do I use? Do I go through CDP? Do I go through the Transition Pathway Initiative for my planning and pathways and my CapEx and my R&D? Who do I ring up at the Science Based Targets Initiative to identify what target I need to set? And do I use other approaches, for example, Amazon's The Climate Pledge, and many others? If I have an element of abatement annually against everything that I can do using technology and scope 1, scope 2 reductions, then how on earth do I navigate the voluntary carbon market space? That is a complicated area. If we can click again, we can see that the target setting rules are also dissipated, with ISSB taking the lead, and our call is for everyone to get behind the ISSB guidance when it comes out very shortly. But of course, there's TCFD and there's EFRAG, and there's others. So not only is it hard for the user in the corporate to kind of map her journey and present that to the board, there's lots of unknowns. When you turn to the ecosystem, actually it's very complicated, and there's a high level of transaction cost to work through all of these different organizations or figure the route through. So even though we have a year of accountability demanded upon companies, how do we know they're doing what they said they would do? How do we get more to do action in the climate space? The reality is it's really hard for companies to go down this journey, and it's nobody's fault. This is a cottage industry that has grown up over the years. Each of these institutions is excellent and has got their own boards and their own approaches, their own data needs, and their own kind of style of doing things. But we're at a stage now where we need hundreds of thousands of companies to quickly go through this system. And of course, you know, we have a soup, not a freeway. And that really is part of the accountability challenge. Sharm el-Sheikh, for those of you who follow these things in a little bit more detail, you'll have noticed that Canada's former Minister of Environment and Climate, Catherine McKenna, led a report called the High Level Expert Group. And that report said, we need accountability among companies. We need more companies to set their target, to create a transition plan, to account for it and to disclose for it. So we work closely at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development with the H-leg, the High Level Expert Group report. And at Sharm el-Sheikh, we presented a vision for how we can strengthen the carbon accountability framework for companies. And if we go to the next slide, we will see how that takes shape if we move to, there we are. So you'll see that actually where we want to get to ensure an easy route through the accountability jungle, there are 4 steps. First of all, set that net zero target, maybe use SBTI or sector roadmaps. Some of people use TCFD reference scenarios. Second, undertake that climate transition plan. And there are elements in that about intermediate emission CapEx targets, shadow carbon pricing. The H-leg report has an excellent annex which shows what a good transition plan should look like. Third, use the greenhouse gas protocol and account for your journey. And there are master classes and support services to help you understand what that looks like, and to start undertaking estimates around scope 3 accounting. And fourth, use the ISSB guidelines as they start to come out to help with reporting and disclosure. So we can boil that difficult user journey and that spaghetti bowl of different organizations really down to 4 steps. And if we're going to achieve a decade of net zero reduction in line with what the science calls, and in fact, really within 7 years by 2030, we're going to need to be able to also show how we can account for that carbon reduction process so that investors, society, policymakers feel confident and comfortable with the approaches being taken and the data that's being collected. So the accountability agenda following this framework is something that WBCSD with its partners is pursuing as a strategic priority through to the COP28, which will take place at the United Arab Emirates at the end of this year. And I'm very pleased to say that the COP presidency and the UNFCCC under new ownership are extremely keen to create such clarity around accountability for corporates on their carbon journey. And so we'll be working very closely with them and other actors to help kind of create this sort of framework. So that's a very brief overview of the accountability agenda, moving from a very difficult user journey and a spaghetti soup of institutions to a 4-step process. And really, I think that will frame the year ahead for accountability on carbon action. I hope that's a quick kind of walk through one of the strategic priorities on accountability for the WBCSD. And with that, Leor, I'll hand back to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dominic. That was great, and a lot of information in a concise way. So thank you so much for that. You definitely are right that there was a bit of an alphabet soup of terms there, and so obviously we have a very engaged audience here, and just looking at a number of the recognizable names who are joining us today, I know that many of you are neck deep in a lot of these issues, especially around disclosure. Having said that, with the consolidation and with some of the things that came out of COP27 at Sharm el-Sheikh, which you touched on, yeah, very interesting that you're outlining how accountability is a significant part of the matrix going forward. If you were to get out your crystal ball, Dominic, and sort of predict what you think will be some of the significant movements, momentum, some of the progress that we're going to see in this next year in that world, or that alphabet soup, that consolidation, what do you see as some of the breakthrough elements or progress that you expect?
Thanks for that, Leo. I'll answer that in 2 ways, because on the one hand, with the rise of the need for corporate accountability in carbon accounting and disclosure, I think many of those institutions will seek resourcing and rent to grow their capacity to do their jobs. So I think we'll see more activity across each of those individual organizations, which is to be expected. However, from the perspective of trying to drive a larger amount of companies more simply through that 4-step carbon accountability process, I think that we perhaps need something slightly different. And we are suggesting that wouldn't it be quite a good idea if we take the user's perspective on this rather than different institutional perspectives on it? So look at this whole thing from the company perspective. So first of all, let us get a wide range of companies, different sectors, different geographies, large and small, to tell us how they are currently experiencing moving around that circuitry from setting a target, creating a transition plan, trying to do their carbon accounting, and trying to disclose. What are the pain points? What are the hurdles that you need to overcome in a very practical sense? How long does it take? How painful is it? How expensive is it? What would you like to see to be fixed? I think we can gather a lot of information and using some quite nice presentations, place that in front of the community that I just explained there. And then number 2, working with that community, and particularly the governance boards of those different organizations and their chairs and businesses who are often on those boards, what might be the 5 things that we need to fix over the course of the year to make this an easier runway and circuit for companies, create recommendations and present those at COP28 with a commitment that that alphabet soup will kind of work together to make this an easier journey for companies who are the primary client, if you like, of that circuitry to get to ISSP disclosure more smoothly, more quickly, and with greater volume. And invite many key global organizations to that presentation to support those 5 recommendations, and then we can move to action and make life a lot easier. So I think that's what we see as a vision for moving this forward. We take the HLEG report very seriously and think it provided an excellent challenge to address integrity and accountability. We've had very, very good feedback from many of our friends across this ecosystem, and more importantly, from many of our global members who would like to see, an easier journey, more clarity, common data, common reporting standards being used. And we work very closely with our friends at the International Sustainability Standards Board, and we're urging, that North Star to be the thing to focus on as a landing point, or as a guide for this process. So I think that's what we would like to see. And I do think that in terms of the political community, there is a strong sense that there might be an element of a corporate suspicion, a rise in greenwashing. Do we really know that companies are doing what they said they would do? And so there is a desire for something like this to be a lot crisper and clearer that politicians can use. And we feel that there's the same sentiment in the investor community. I believe in ESG, activities would say, an investor in that space, but I need the ammunition to prove that point. Please, can you give me, the storyline that I can use? And can we start to show if companies take this journey and the system is strengthened and clearer, that actually there's a lower cost of capital that companies can attract if they take all of those steps. And that really is the, if you like, the North Star from a corporate perspective, because it shows that this is really a smart thing to do from the market perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Dominic. Yeah, very thoughtful comments. Lots to unpack there. And I just want to encourage those of you who are listening that there is a Q&A button on your screen. You can ask a question directly to Dominic, and I'll read it out to him. In the meantime, I want to keep the conversation going. I want to bring Geoff Pegg into the conversation. Geoff is the head of sustainability and environment at TELUS. He has held that role since 2011, and after 10 years in customer experience and operations roles, both locally and internationally, he has led TELUS's award-winning sustainability strategy, governance, and disclosure, including establishing the company's long-term climate-related and waste diversion goals and targets, and initiating TELUS's leading practice of linking executive team member pay to sustainability objectives. So kudos for that. Geoff also is a CBSR board member. So we get a chance to work with Geoff often. We love to do so, and really happy that you have joined this conversation, Geoff. And let me just ask you, in the lead up to this conversation, we were talking a little bit about what the themes for 2023 are in your mind. You had a couple of interesting things to say. I won't steal your thunder. Can you tell us what you expect as some of the priorities in the year ahead?
There's a couple, and thanks, Leor, for the introduction. Happy to be here. Always eager to discuss what we're doing and the broad approach to sustainability, share our journey, and hopefully get feedback that can help guide the way we approach these things. So always appreciate these opportunities. And one of the things we were discussing is we have just come through sort of our more in-depth materiality assessment that we do here at TELUS annually. But sort of every third year, we get an independent third party to come in and really look at taking a structured evidence-based approach to understanding what the topics are meaningful for TELUS and for its stakeholders. And one that came to the fore was around biodiversity. So even though we understand through our engagements that TELUS and the telecommunications industry in general does not necessarily have a large impact on biodiversity and water. I'll just put that aside for a second. Those two issues, biodiversity and water, became material issues for TELUS. We understood that, and Canadians really care about these issues. And ultimately, what we're learning is that they expect corporations, companies, to be having a position and taking action with respect to biodiversity, sort of regardless of the impact that you have on the environment. I think S&P Global shared a study early last year, 2023 now. So yeah, early last year, that really showed that for sort of big industries and food, energy, infrastructure, and the fashion industry sort of have about 90% of the man-made pressure on biodiversity, that other industries and organizations are just as held accountable by stakeholders in terms of having a position. So I think this is going to be a focus in terms of what TELUS is doing. We're kind of early in our journey. We've been researching the topic, obviously, furiously since we've wanted to take a stand. We've had ad hoc efforts around biodiversity, partnering with organizations such as the WWF, NCC over time. We really want to craft a better strategy, and one of the first things that we want to accomplish is publishing a commitment. So getting out there and understanding what these commitments look like has been a fascinating venture. There's a number of great examples out there. There's a lot of sort of one-pagers in terms of commitments, which I must say I have a bias for. Simple, easy to understand, to the point. Usually talking about what their commitment is, why it's important to them, and what they're going to do about it. Simple as that. So we're sort of on that journey. We hope to actually publish our first biodiversity commitment here in the next month or two. And so that's sort of where we're at. There's key topics, of course, when it comes to biodiversity in terms of, talking about what governance you would have around that as an organization. What resources are you putting towards it? Are there any policies or standards that you have? Do you have partnerships and memberships that really assist in terms of biodiversity, and what approaches you're taking? And of course, what's important to many stakeholders is, do you have goals or targets that you want to share and work towards as well? So biodiversity, and along with that, of course, is nature-based solutions. We were just talking about the impact that organizations have from a GHG perspective, and the more organizations, big or small, are making these net zero commitments, the demand for nature-based solutions will far outstrip supply over the coming year. So it's a very material topic for organizations, and what kind of nature-based solutions exist out there. So maybe I'll leave it at that, and then just I think those are two areas in which a lot of organizations, as I say, big or small, will probably need to focus in on here in the coming year. I think you're on mute, Leor.
Thank you. Thanks for your comments. I know there's a lot on your plate, so the fact that you boiled down a couple of very salient points is really helpful for this conversation. And I can't help but think, as we heard at the outset here, what Dominic had to say around accountability and some of the evolving movements, and how greenwashing and the need to make sure that this is real is a big part of the conversation going forward. Geoff, how do you make sure, as you're developing the biodiversity commitment that you're working on, that it isn't like what we saw some companies do at COP15 in Montreal, where it's like people are standing up saying, by X year we're going to be nature positive. And what does that even mean? What are the standards? Nobody knows what you're talking about exactly. It sounds good, but it's just like the accountability is always a question. How are you ensuring that that this stuff is grounded in something practical and is following some kind of process?
Yeah, I have to admit it's a constant battle. So I mean, from an approach standpoint, we have taken over, the last decade plus, everything that we do, we want to be transparent about it, build trust with our stakeholders. So it's kind of like an anti-greenwashing approach. We want to be able to say we're walking the talk on everything that we do. So important to us. It's funny. I often just ground myself by saying, these things are risks to the organization. So we really need to approach them that way. Therefore, greenwashing is something that we would, want to avoid at all costs, of course. So taking action is sort of the best solution to all of that. Having said that, you're right. I mean, I've heard that term, nature positive, a lot, and I'm challenged internally here. And it's not coming from me or my team. So I'm, maybe there's marketing teams, communication teams are looking for good ways to sort of describe some of the things that we're doing. And I, well, first of all, I feel like I have to dedicate resources to help manage that within the organization. But also, challenging, what does it actually mean? And so when you see biodiversity commitments, you have net positive impact, you have no net loss, are very common commitments that you see when it comes to biodiversity, but there's a little bit more, grounding in terms of, what those actually mean. But when I hear these terms that you mentioned, wow, you really have to make sure that you're managing that internally. And you know what, I Dominic was talking about trying to, look for some North Stars. He mentioned, the ISSB, for example, like, these standards are really something that can assist with that type of thing when you're approaching these topics. So it's something that, we try to focus in on as well. And lastly, maybe I'll say in our disclosures, when we are talking about everything that we're doing, is it's not always all sunshine and roses. If you're transparent and talking about the challenges that you face, how you are going to address them or try to, and then what were the outcomes? What did you learn, and what are you going to do about it if you're not, getting to where you want to get to on the timelines that you want to get to? And I found, we've done that for many, many years, actually getting positive feedback rather than negative feedback about talking about challenges that you face and hurdles that you've had to overcome.
I like that approach a lot. You're kind of describing a bit of an iterative approach to say, hey, this is where we are realistically, this is where we want to go, but here are the challenges, barriers ahead. I agree. I think that's refreshing. I have seen that from TELUS in the past, so anticipate a continued level of transparency that way. But you're also kind of describing a bit of an innovation approach. We're trying some things, we're getting feedback, we're adapting accordingly. And so that kind of leads me to my other question that I wanted to ask you, which is, what are some of the most innovative things that you're looking at in this space that you're excited about in the year ahead?
I guess a couple things. One I'll talk about just in the spirit of the conversation was around, in our industry anyways, is having digital policy becoming climate policy, right? It was something that, we've been observing. There's been a few reports from Jesse or the World Economic Forum with respect to digital policy as climate policy. It's amazing that digital policies aren't mentioned in the climate action plans of any of the G7 countries, including Canada. These reports that I was referring to, indicate that digital connectivity and technologies can really reduce GHG emissions by up to 20%. Here in Canada, we are fortunate to have high quality, telecom networks, but we also have a high GHG emissions per capita, right? So we have this opportunity to become a world leader in digital climate policy and solutions, of course, which encourages us to be working with governments at different levels on trying to implement some digital policy. So I kind of just wanted to, it inspired me to think about that during this conversation here today. Other than that, in terms of nature-based solutions, as I said, are going to be required for demand for these solutions in order to help organizations reduce their GHG emissions, and not only but having quality behind all of these nature-based solutions here too. TELUS has been making some forays in leveraging our core capabilities and technologies in the forestry industry, for example. So we've made some investments into technologies and partnering with organizations on boiling it down, planting more trees, and looking at it from an end-to-end perspective. What can we do with our technology to monitor, map, plant, and then create carbon solutions for customers as well. So again, early days, but I'm excited about what these opportunities present for ourselves and for our communities, and of course for our customers.
Yeah, Geoff, thank you so much for going there, and yeah, especially interested in the whole digital strategy as a climate policy. I think that's super interesting, and could have quite a huge impact in Canada in particular. I see there's a question in the Q&A. Please keep them coming, but I am going to also circle back to it after we have a chance to hear from Andrea, because I know she has wealth of experience, a lot of really interesting perspectives to share. And Andrea, thank you so much for participating in our conversation today. And for those of you who are meeting Andrea for the first time here, let me just say briefly that she's the VP of Impact Strategy for Vancity Bank. She is passionate in her belief that business has a key role to play in creating a socially just and environmentally sustainable future. And following her passion for marrying business with social change, Andrea joined Vancity in 2003 and is now holds her vice president role. We were really excited to see you move into that role last year. And she leads a team of sustainability professionals in developing strategies and programs focused on reducing carbon emissions, increasing financial inclusion, and achieving racial justice and reconciliation. Really happy to have you. And Andrea, I'm curious how you interpret some of what we're saying here today. What key themes are you looking at? Obviously, different type of organization that you work for compared to the other two speakers. What are some of the things that you see through the lens of Vancity that are key themes going forward in 2023?
Yeah, thanks, Leor, and great to be here this morning. And just really struck by some of your comments, Dominic and Geoff as well, because so many parallels. Dominic, you spoke about 2023 as a year of continued accountability, and that's absolutely the case in the financial sector, as you mentioned, in terms of investors and in the direction that banks and Vancity is a credit union. We are BC based, but we are watching very closely and very hopeful that the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions that regulates national bank charters will mandate that financial institutions need to implement climate transition plans, including targets in line with 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming and emissions disclosure, and that will be just a key lever in terms of really moving the dial on social finance and moving capital to support achieving net zero. And along with that, we will need to see a continued shift in regulation of other sectors to support emissions disclosures as well. So, for example, for us, it would be really helpful if there was energy labeling for buildings, so we could have a clear picture of our financial emissions. And this, combined with setting specific targets for decarbonizing buildings, would help the market understand what needs to be delivered and how to build itself accordingly. It's necessary for financial institutions to give us a clear picture so we can target those high emitters in our portfolio. But this data is also really important to inform policy decisions and policy directions. So I'd say that's the first key priority for us. The second is really, in the themes coming out of COP, wanting to see transition strategies being more rooted in community and focused on people and accounting for Indigenous rights. So I think this is particularly acute as we move into a recession and more people are struggling with rising interest rates and inflation. So we need to really work harder to understand the intersection of climate and people, and how that's impacting issues like affordability, Indigenous rights, job creation. So that conversation around net zero will need to continue to broaden to put more emphasis on developing local people-focused transition plans. And I think that's really needed to unlock those opportunities of job creation, improving the resilience of our workforce, and empowering Indigenous economic leadership. So mitigation is critical. Adaptation is needed, and more urgently in the areas where we that are more vulnerable to climate change and have less capacity. And we need to be really incorporating this thinking in this reality into our transition plans as businesses. For us, this really hit home here in British Columbia over the last couple of years, as we've seen so many of our communities deal with fires, floods, heat domes, and all of which disproportionately impacted vulnerable communities, seniors, Indigenous communities, low-income communities. So that would be kind of the second priority. And the third priority that I want to talk a bit about today is just that continued demand for socially responsible investments and products. So on the investment side of our business, we saw significant growth for our responsible investing products in 2022. And while we expect investments to slow given the environment, we still believe that people are still looking for ESG investing, and they're looking, as Geoff said, this is a risk game. So they're looking to minimize risk. They're looking to improve returns over time, and more, they're also looking for investments that, or making product choices that align with their values. And so similarly, I think we can expect to see more product innovation and offerings that are positioned to support individuals and businesses to take action on climate. So things like incentives for home and building owners to undertake retrofits. And I was spoken to previously that whole concept of greenwashing. As a result, I think we're also going to see more examples of greenwashing that are going to surface as consumers become more sophisticated and more selective in their purchasing decisions, and as civil society groups are holding businesses more accountable to walking the talk, as it was mentioned earlier. So those are really the three priorities that I anticipate this year related to social finance and sustainable financing investments in the race to net zero, is that heightened regulation of financial institutions and other sectors in support of the net zero ambitions, bringing more focus on people and communities into the transition plans of businesses, and that ongoing demand for social responsible investments and products.
Awesome. thank you for that really valuable perspective and great. I'm so glad that you joined us here because this is a great rounding of some of the topics that we've covered here. I heard you talk about energy labeling for buildings, community transition strategies, especially as that relates to furthering Indigenous reconciliation, as well as continued demand for ESG investment products. Well, one thing that I didn't hear you talk about, but I'm curious to know, what do you see as sort of the key barrier to all these things coming to fruition in 2023?
Well, I would say one of the key barriers is just moving forward on some of the regulations and the policies that need to be implemented. And the barrier behind that is as always, political will, confidence. So I think, a bit of a call out. I think there's been a lot of corporate action on climate, and we've really seen that accelerate across Canada. But there are still many companies who have yet to include climate action as a central tenet of their government affairs or their government relations agenda. And so I would really urge companies to be comprehensively adopting science-based climate policy agendas and to connect with other organizations, whether it's businesses, First Nations, municipal governments, civil society groups, coalitions, to really scale up and advance that agenda. And I think that would go a long way to accelerating the action that needs to happen.
Just one sort of step further on what you're saying here, and what I'm kind of drilling at is you mentioned it and alluded to it as well, the idea of creating a mandatory climate-related financial disclosure. And so how exactly does that, because I just wonder if there's a disconnect in some people's minds. It seems like, yes, there needs to be some policy there, but how is that related to driving investment in the other areas you talked about, for example, around community transition, energy labeling for businesses, etc.?
I guess you can think of it as a bit of a trickle down, right? If financial institutions have to reduce the emissions of their portfolio, then we have to understand the emissions of the businesses that we lend to, and a lot of that is about data, and so we have to support, but also create that environment that enables businesses, whether they're builders in construction, small businesses, larger businesses. A lot of focus has been on oil and gas, but now we're needing to really move that into that next layer of sectors to really understand their emissions. And so I think that's why focusing on the investor space and on banks and lenders is really a bit of a tipping point. Does that answer your question, Leor?
Yeah, it does. And I like the way you put that, the way that it's a tipping point. I sort of see what you're saying as that the regulation is helping to essentially unlock the investments that are going in the directions that the data is pointing to. So that's great. Thank you. So in the few minutes remaining, I want to make sure that I address some of the Q&A questions that are coming through. And in particular, one question for you, Geoff, is asking, as you're looking to develop the nature-based solutions that TELUS is working towards, is there alignment with the Indigenous traditional knowledge through some kind of collaboration and consultation?
Definitely. So, I mean, it's something that TELUS is committed to with our Indigenous Reconciliation Action Plan. First of all, is to undertake these conversations and consultations with Indigenous groups. But particularly when it comes to nature-based solutions, because a lot of those are obviously focused in on the land and sea. And if we are seeking in as I mentioned, some of the work we're doing in the forestry sector, it's inevitable that we will need to and have done engage with Indigenous groups and learning about the history and the approaches that have been taken in the past, and understanding what the thinking is in terms of future solutions. It's simple in terms of even consulting on we can look what a seed zone says on a provincial map of what type of trees or plants that you might be wanting to plant, but there's also a lot of local knowledge that's important to appreciate, understand, and incorporate into the plans that you're making. So I guess in short, I'm rambling a bit, but yes, it's part of the approach, and needs to be if we're going to do it right.
Thank you for that
question.
Yeah, really good question. Thank you, Katie, for that question. And I have a question for Dominic that I'd love to hear your thoughts on. One of the sort of big headlines that came out of COP27 last year was really on the loss and damage fund that is in development or going to be a significant part of essentially compensating those who are most affected by climate change. How much of a factor do you see that influencing this particular year, or is it something that people are going to be figuring out for the next several years? What does that actually mean? How does that fund actually get administered? Where does it go? What kind of factor do you see that playing in 2023?
Okay, Leo, thanks very much for that. And you're right, it was a kind of a big deal that came out of Sharm el-Sheikh in the final hours of the negotiations, this agreement to establish a loss and damage fund mechanism under UNFCCC, which is the important thing. So that means that there will be, ongoing discussion, and the sort of details of the mechanism will be figured out, hopefully, at the COP28 at UAE. So in the absence of that, there are kind of resources that went to something called the Global Shield, UN Early Warning Systems, about 340 million in new pledges in the interim. I think one of the interesting things for this kind of audience is above and beyond what public sector government-to-government pledges go into a loss and damage fund, where the kind of mobilization of private sector investment into decarbonisation in the short run and green industrialization in the long run can be triggered. And that is something that is a really strong theme of the upcoming COP at the UAE. So as well as relying on public sector flows, given how strained some of those balance sheets are, and recalling that back in 2009, $100 billion was pledged to developing countries, which hasn't quite been met even now for mitigation, let alone for loss and damage. I think it's important for all of us who work outside of those government circuits to see what approaches can be taken to channel as much productive investment as possible into the green infrastructure space. And that is a theme that is fast taking off. If you think about some of these so-called JETPs, just energy transition partnerships, for example, in South Africa, in Vietnam, in Indonesia, these were extraordinarily interesting packages of investment from public and private to help shift energy infrastructure away from coal and to new. And imagine you could have a series of JETPs around green industrialization clusters, or the new kinds of fuels that we're going to need, hydrogen, ammonia, to help developing countries build their industrial infrastructure. So I would suggest that alongside waiting to see on how public sector funds will play out for the loss and damage fund, there's an awful lot of interest and energy that will be put into those other kinds of mechanisms. And that's what the COP28 presidency in the UAE, I think, is seeking to stimulate quite heavily.
Interesting comments, and I thought that was interesting. You connected it to the just transition plans that are policy in many countries. Canada just released a just transition strategy for this country, and it's been controversial in some, especially in some parts of the country. Alberta, in particular, where I'm based here, hasn't viewed it necessarily.
Well, as you said earlier, Leo, and I think Andrea and Geoff both alluded to this. You know, the big takeaway I think over the last few years is the decarbonisation, the net zero, the low carbon agenda is not a technical thing. This is something that has to go hand in hand with the tackling inequality agenda, with the inclusion agenda, hence the phrase just transition.
Yeah.
And these things cannot be separated. Even in Europe, where I'm based, you know, when the government of France tried to differentiate fuel taxes to have a higher tax on diesel, lower tax, you know, on others, you saw poorer people whose disposable income is very limited put on their yellow jackets and have a Gilets Jaunes movement. You probably can recall that. So it's a very pertinent thing in many countries around the world, even more so coming out of COVID with the cost of living crisis and inflation that people are facing. So tackling inequality, having a just transition, and having a just low carbon net zero transition are absolutely hand in hand. One cannot be done without the other.
Thank you. Those are great comments. I'd like to leave that there and just acknowledge we're at the top of the hour, which means that part one of our conversation is reaching its conclusion. And for those of you that are able, we'd love to invite you to stay a little longer, where we're going to unpack CBSR's program for the year ahead. And so we'd love for you to stay for that. That'll probably just be about a 15 to 20 minute conversation. Let's keep that lively and answer your questions there. But some of you will be signing off now, so I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you so much. Thank you to our speakers, Dominic Waughray from the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, Geoff Pegg from TELUS, Andrea Harris from Vancity. You all provided a very rich context and background for this conversation about what the year ahead will look like. We'll wait and see to see if the predictions and the themes that you identified are indeed what will shape our country, our economy going forward. Thank you for all of you that are tuning in. Please, if you haven't subscribed to our newsletter already, do so. It'll be a good way for you to find out when upcoming webinars are taking place. And for anybody that's thinking about whether to connect with us at Globe Exchange happening in Toronto, February 27th to March 1st, we would love to see you there. There's an exciting program coming together, and it'll be more than well worth your time. Thank you and have a wonderful day for those of you that are signing off. And for those of you that are staying, we'll just give you a moment to reset here. Ida, I'm going to ask you to put up the slides for the next portion there. And again, thank you so much to our speakers. For those of you that are wondering, there is going to be, this has been recorded and it will be available on the CBSR YouTube channel. And again, if you're subscribed to our newsletter, then you will see notice of that as well. Ida, thanks very much for the slide. Yes, I see it well on my end. That's great. And good. I see that a number of you have stayed. That's terrific. So we're pleased about that. If you just go to the next slide there, we're going to give you a bit of a snapshot of what you can expect from CBSR going forward. So just looking at the list of people who are still on the line here, I see a number of you are CBSR members, which is great, and a number of you that are not. So that's great too, because we want to make sure that you have a good sense of what it looks like to be a CBSR member. But on your screen here, what you'll see is a bit of an overview of the program that people keep coming back to CBSR for. This is really an indication of the fact that our core product continues to be the really rich roundtables and peer learning and sharing discussions that we facilitate. Typically, we put together a whole bunch of research on a particular subtopic under the ESG sustainability heading, and we provide that research exclusively to our members, and then host a forum twice in the year. It'll be in person. Twice in the year, it'll be virtual, and that forum includes guest speakers and some case studies from within our membership of how companies are addressing these issues. I'll go in shortly here into what the themes are for the 4 main roundtables that we do. And we do have, just a recognition that we do have 3 different cohorts that are members of CBSR, a group that we call the Excel leaders, the corporate members, and the SMEs or small and medium enterprise members. The program looks a little different for companies that are representing the smaller businesses. They do get 2 of these roundtables rather than 4, and they're much more facilitated discussions. I'll go into a little bit of what's new and happening around those SME discussions in particular. But I also wanted to highlight that the Net Zero Working Group is something that's been very popular. In 2000, we launched this in conjunction with our Net Zero Leaderboard because so many of our members were announcing their net zero targets. And so we created a group, Chatham House rules style, where companies could share what exactly they're doing on their pathway to net zero, what kind of investments they're making, and how they're actually measuring their progress. And so that is a group that you'll continue to see us facilitating in the year ahead here. And Globe Exchange will be our really big signature event that happens this year. It's coming up quickly, so if you haven't already made your plans to be there, please do so. CBSR members do get free passes to be there. If you're an Excel leader, then you get 2 free passes. If you're a corporate member, you get 1. And if you're an SME member, or if you just want to get lots more tickets for your team, there are some really great discounts that we can offer you and your company. There's some consulting support that's built in. And I'll just say about this that a lot of our members do not take us up on this. So really want to encourage those of you that are members, utilize this. It's a really great opportunity to either develop a research report, to do some materiality assessments, and get general consulting on your priorities for the year. And it's a great way to test drive some consultants who can do some great work for you, who are subject matter experts. I mentioned some of the research that we do in conjunction with our roundtables. We have a members-only resource portal that's accessible with a web password right on our website. If you've never been there, I encourage you to do so. There's been a lot of updates to it recently, and it's a great resource where you find a lot of the old or archived research reports or quarterly spotlight briefs that we've done in the past. And the last point relates to the next slide here, which I'll just go over. A couple of things that are new in our network this year that we're really excited to bring to the CBSR members. Next slide, please, Ida. So a couple of things that are new to watch out for this year. One is that we are doing these regional cross-country checkups. That's what we're not coining it, because that's a popular CBC program, but something that we're borrowing that language to have regional check-ins where you and other CBSR members will get together and be there. It'll be a facilitated conversation to really check in on what are the things that you're feeling challenged by, what are your priorities this year, and what are other people doing in relation to those same issues and challenges. So we're really excited to really bring our national network down to community level opportunities to get together and have meaningful conversations. And we'll be going across the country to connect with our members this year, with more in person, more FaceTime than we have in the last couple of years as a result of the COVID pandemic. And one of the things that we're doing that's new this year, especially with the SME roundtables, is that we're facilitating these mastermind sessions. So there's one coming up very quickly here in early February with O'Kane, one of our SME members, where they are presenting a particular challenge that they're facing and a facilitated process to get the collective wisdom of our membership to help to address that challenge. So if you want an invitation to this, you don't already have it in your calendar, please let us know, and we'd love to have you be part of this mastermind session. It's a bit of a innovation for us, a bit of a trial, and if it goes well, it's something that we are looking to scale up to other areas of our program as well. And then the last thing that's new this year that I'm really excited about that I want to share with you, but there'll be a lot more details at Globe Exchange, so do come out to that, where we're going to be launching, or for those of you that have been with CBSR for a long time, relaunching the Education Foundation. So this is a program that was, or a standalone charitable organization CBSR started back in 2011 that is being essentially resurrected, will continue to be at least from a governance perspective, a standalone charitable organization that CBSR manages. It will be a vehicle to really complement the membership association that CBSR is known for and well liked for. And this vehicle is really aimed at identifying specific interventions that are more systemic in nature. They could be perhaps policy change, regulatory changes, or creation of new incentives that level the playing field and drive more action towards sustainable outcomes. I'm often asked for examples. One of the key things that we just launched, that's kind of a precursor to the launch of the foundation itself, is a Sustainable Procurement Fellowship. So this is a program that with support from HP that we recently launched to really identify the key issues, the key barriers to major companies in Canada moving forward on creating more sustainable procurement practices in-house, and then the creation of ambassadors who can potentially join us as we advocate towards government to create more sustainable procurement practices in the public sector, as a way to incentivize more companies being awarded contracts as a result of their sustainability performance and disclosure. That's an example of one of the things that the foundation will be taking on, and we're really happy. I'm glad that Geoff stayed on to this portion, because really our ability to launch this foundation is a big part of the investment that TELUS has made in the Education Foundation. And so really excited to be finally bringing it to fruition, and we'll have a big celebration to announce some of the things that the Education Foundation will be doing in the year ahead and how it will benefit CBSR members. Really as a think tank, as a content creator, and an opportunity to engage the public sector and other key stakeholders across the economy in new and unique ways. Next slide, please. And so I mentioned that the roundtables that we do, which are really facilitated conversations where we pack a lot of content, guest speakers, and bring our members together around these particular subtopics. They follow a quarterly theme. And so for Q1, our theme, which relates to the webinar that we just watched, is around establishing credibility and avoiding greenwashing. Really excited to say that we've got some amazing guest speakers lined up at Globe Exchange, where we're going to bring our members together for an in-person roundtable around this topic. We've got some great research and content that is, for those of you that that are members. It's going to come to you as a pre-reading document, a standalone set of research and summaries and some perspectives that we want to share with you. For those of you who are familiar with him, Chris Coulter, the CEO of GlobeScan, is going to be joining us as a speaker. Chris is also the chair of our board, so we've heard from Chris before, and we love hearing what the latest is. He'll be sharing some hot off the press research that's been done, that GlobeScan has done, specifically around accountability with the Canadian companies internationally. And so stay tuned for that, and potentially another exciting guest speaker that we're in the process of confirming around this. Next slide here. The other topic that we're going to cover in Q2 as part of our roundtable and as well as part of the Net Zero Working Group is all around biodiversity and nature solutions. You heard Geoff talk about that quite a bit on this webinar. We agree it's a really important topic, and some of the output from COP15 will play a role in this. And as well, there's some great content coming together that we're going to unveil as part of the Net Zero Working Group and Roundtable in Q2. And then for Q3, next slide, you'll hear a lot more about some of the things that Andrea talked about, which is around mobilizing sustainable finance. How do you actually pay for the net zero pathways, circular business strategies, and as well for companies that are looking at really integrating social purpose across their supply chain? Where do you find the investment tools to actually drive capital, and what are some of the best practices out there? So that's really what Q3 is all about. And then Q4, we're really excited about the content that's coming together around looking at equity partnerships and effective Indigenous collaboration. For those of you that were following the news very closely in 2022, there's some really interesting developments that were happening. One example that I was following, and maybe this is showing my bias for being here in Alberta, there's some really interesting energy plays. Suncor offloaded their renewable energy division, and one of the key proponents for or potential buyers of those renewable energy assets was a consortium of Indigenous communities. Really interesting development of how Indigenous communities are being empowered to take on really ambitious projects, and there's some really interesting partnerships that we feel are really important case studies. They're brand new in Canada, so we're going to be highlighting some of those and launching a parallel initiative. So a little bit early days still, but stay tuned because there's some exciting content around that. So the next slide is really just a summary of the 4 key themes that I just went through. But I'm interested to hear from you in the chat, in the Q&A, whichever is more comfortable for you. What do you think about the key themes that I've just presented? Are we missing anything that you feel is really critical for the year ahead? Do you have any questions generally around CBSR's membership, the program that we offer, anything at all? I would love to hear your thoughts. And Sarah raised her hand. So Ida, are you able to bring Sarah right into the conversation here? And Sarah is one of our members from Meridian. She always has very thoughtful things to share. So I would love to hear directly from Sarah if we can make that possible. Let's just unmute her. There she is.
Hi, are you able to hear me?
We're able to hear you. Yeah, if you want to come on video, we'd love to see you too.
I don't know. How do I put the video on? I don't know if I'm allowed.
Should be bottom left.
They cannot, unfortunately.
Okay,
Yeah.
it sounds like that might not be possible.
Well, I'm having a good hair day. It's too bad.
That is too bad. Yeah. I would love
Anyway, I'm really looking forward to seeing you at the Globe conference, and we're sponsoring it as well. So I'm pretty excited.
Super. We're excited to see you there, Sarah.
I have a question because you know me, and when I have these things that come up in the work that we're doing on scope 1 and 2 and 3, and then I also love the presentation from TELUS, and I'd love to dig in a little bit more about tying compensation to ESG. But I guess my question is, Leor, what is the best way to get answers to questions when we have them? Because I feel like, you know, I have them and I just reach out and send a note and I'm probably inundating you. Is there a formal process where maybe there's a Q&A fact sheet or best practices or something that I'm not getting or using? Because that would be really helpful just to figure out how to connect to find others. Or do we have a kind of like a Facebook group where we have a forum where we can ask each other and quickly problem solve?
You know what, Sarah, thank you so much for the question. It's a really great question. You know, this has come up before. So let me address this and say, first of all, we love to be inundated by you. So please don't hesitate. We love to hear from our members. We learn a lot from you. So never hesitate to reach out. If you are, of course, welcome to send it to me directly. But also if you send it to info@cbsr.ca, the whole team will see it and will kind of marshal the right resources to make sure that the question gets answered. But in addition to that, because this question has come up, we are in the process, and we haven't launched it yet, but we hope to launch it this year to be able to have a bit of a listserv so that you can actually email your question and it goes to the members at large. To be able to sort of crowdsource some of the collective wisdom from across our membership. We did try, some of you will remember, we did try this through a chat function that we had on an app. It was a Slack channel, that's what it was. We did create a Slack channel. It didn't really take, so we're gonna make another go here. We're gonna take another crack at creating a good platform to be able to ask those questions and get those who are really engaged on, you know, saying, yeah, I'm really working on the same thing too. Here's what we've found, and tapping the collective wisdom.
That'll be
so
awesome.
Watch for that. That's still in development, but we hope to launch it a little later this year.
And do you have a fact sheet for things like, you know, some of the things that come up, like, you know, we have TCFD happening, and you know, what are we finding? Like some of the presentation you just gave, like what are we finding is the latest and greatest measurement frameworks, and are they evolving? And do we see a definitive metric and something that's going to come in under legislation so we're all using the same? Like those kinds of questions while we're educating inside our organizations, like how do we keep up to date on the most recent I guess things about measurements and frameworks is helpful as well.
Yeah, great question, Sarah. You know, for our Excel leaders, we are putting together a monthly summary of some public policy, like briefs on public policy developments. Some of that relates to what you're saying. Could we be doing an FAQ on some of the hot topics? Yeah, we could probably be doing more of that. I'm noting your feedback here, and I think there's probably something that we can do with that, just to make sure that some of the like really hot topics, mandatory disclosure in particular, is something that has come up a lot. Last year, we were speaking to a number of companies about potentially developing some kind of research report to, you know, to sort of talk about where we see the future of mandatory disclosure going. There was some interest, but perhaps not enough interest. Maybe it's time to raise that conversation again and see if there's an opportunity to turn that into a research report that we do this year. Do you think that would be helpful, Sarah? You're on mute there.
I do think it would be helpful. I think anything that sort of keeps us up to date, because, you know, we're always often asked by our leaders in our organization, okay, what's coming down? What do we need to prepare ourselves for? What's the latest, particularly around TCFD, because I know the consultations are happening. You know, are there metrics and frameworks that are becoming easier for us to implement? There's so many, and without a definitive regulatory framework, you know, what to use is a conversation that we're having in an ongoing way. So I just think the ability to connect with each other and ask each other real-time questions, and then any sort of, you're right, hot topics or things that we should dig in on from our own country, from our own leadership organization in this, I think would be really helpful.
Awesome.
And I'll let somebody else talk now.
Yeah, I see Michael. Michael's raised his hand. Mike, unfortunately, we're not able to bring you on video here, but we can hear you now.
Can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Great. Sending warm regards from chilly Toronto, and appreciate this conversation. I just wanted to raise purpose because rumor has it, and I'm not sure how much you're able to share at this point, Leor, but around the Canadian Purpose Economy Project, which is something I'm very excited about. And I know there may be further discussions as part of Globe Exchange. Given I will be in Nicaragua at that time, I'm wondering if for those members and those that are keen to lead on purpose, if there's anything you can share at this time, just to sort of have a sense of how that on its own, and then how it aligning with the work of CBSR and the leadership of Canadian businesses, big and small.
Well, first of all, thanks so much for the question. I'm happy to talk about it. It's certainly no secret, and the only reason that we haven't covered it in this webinar or really, I guess, anywhere too public is just because it's still quite early days. But I am in the chat, including a link to the latest on it. So the website is purposeeconomy.ca. And the way this came about is that I mentioned earlier that we're in the process of launching or relaunching the CBSR Foundation, and so once we have a chance to do that, then we'll talk a lot more about some of the projects that the foundation has already taking on. But we've been really fortunate as we've been talking to potential funders and others, gauging and obtaining feedback on the theory of change that we've developed for the foundation. We have identified a number of strategic projects that we've been, some of which we've been invited to participate in. The Canadian Purpose Economy projects is an example of that. Some of you will know Cora Strandberg, a lot of the work around this, and it's really been kind of a 3-year process in building this, what has been labeled to date as the Canadian Purpose Purpose Economy Champions group in Canada. Some of that work culminated in a bunch of research. Some of that culminated in a conference called the Propelling Purpose Summit that happened last year, or is that 2 years ago? 2 years ago now. Time's flying fast, and so this is really an attempt to capture all the goodwill that came out of that and the momentum that's building around the creation, the stimulation of a purpose economy in Canada. And last year, some of you who are following this will note that Corporate Knights released a report that identified essentially the top 30 Canadian companies who have integrated a social purpose that felt very hard to their business. The idea around social purpose, for those of you that are maybe newer to it, is that it's not, it's a departure from the idea of like a company doing sort of what they do and then also trying to mitigate some of the impacts of their operations by investing in social and environmental outcomes. This is really different than that. This is really an organization that's very existence is benefiting the community and the environment, and so it's very deeply integrated in the way that the company does business. And there's 30 companies that were identified through this corporate Knights report as demonstrating advanced the social purpose, and 11 of those companies are CBSR members. We're really excited about that. So clearly a growing movement within the CBSR membership, and so it made a lot of sense for CBSR to be invited to act as the secretariat for this project. And so it's still early days. We haven't officially launched the project. We did do a soft launch, which you see as part of that website that I just linked to. And there's going to be a lot of work on this in the year ahead, and more to say about it probably mid-year.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm very, very excited about this. I'm working with CBSR members that are both B Corps and social purpose businesses. So it's a really critical, and I view it as a leadership opportunity for us all. And so would love to further explore involvement in whatever contributions members can make, leading, collaborating, sharing, supporting, and really taking things to the next level. Thank you.
Awesome. And yeah, I see Maureen Young is on the line. That's great. I'm so glad that you're here for that, and that you saw that there's a lot of interest in the Canadian Purpose Economy Project. Coast Capital, we're really happy that they're the ones who made major investment to enable us to act as the secretary for this project and really take it forward this year. One of the key things that I didn't mention that will be part of this is that there will be a number of action groups that will result, that are really a culmination of some of the research that's been done to identify the key levers to stimulate Canadian purpose economy. And so some of these action groups are ones that you might want to be involved in going forward. And please do continue to read the CBSR newsletter to find out opportunities to be engaged in that work. Any other questions before we sign off here? Okay. Well, certainly if you continue to think of questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. I mentioned earlier that info@cbsr.ca is a great way to engage the full team to make sure that your responses don't get missed, and are if it's a bit more of a technical question, we can some of the resources to make sure that we get a thorough, thoughtful response to you. But reach out to us anytime. We always love to hear from members and prospective members. I appreciate you sharing this precious time with us today to hear about the year ahead, and we're very excited to work with you in 2023. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful rest of the day.